Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Bald Island. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator for the Old Baldy Foundation. And behind the camera here, we have Chris Webb, our Executive Director. Our other staff members are working remotely, the Old Baldy Foundation, doing what we can to flatten this curve to prevent the spread of this virus. And on behalf of all of our staff and directors, we hope that you and your family are safe, that you're healthy, and that you're managing to get by through these extremely challenging times. This afternoon, we're bringing you battery number 4 in Fort Holmes, which was the fortification built by Confederates on Bald Head Island during the American Civil War. Last week, we brought you battery number 3, which is an obscure battery. It's located tucked away in a neighborhood that isn't frequented or visited much. Battery number 4 here is probably the most famous battery. Folks get to visit this battery via a trail that is maintained by the Bald Head Island Association, or Homeowners Association here on the island. So we thought that we'd bring you this battery this afternoon and elaborate on what we discussed last week at battery number 3 and elaborate on what we discussed this morning with arms and ammunition in our archives. So Chris is going to pan to this map here. And you have to bear with us. The bugs, believe it or not, are out already on Bald Head Island, and we did not bring our bug spray. So this map here shows you that 1.7 mile long wall that made an irregular circle, if you will, around Old Baldy Lighthouse. So from an aerial perspective, that is what Fort Holmes looked like. Now, of course, there weren't cannons on every little nook and cranny on that 1.7 mile long wall. Rather, they were concentrated in 5 batteries, or areas where there were cannons. 4 were numbered. You see battery number 1, battery number 2, battery number 3, where we were last week, and up here we are at battery number 4. The 5th was not numbered. It was named after the fort's namesake, Battery Holmes, and that was located where the Cape Fear River dumps out into the Atlantic Ocean. I think this map is really peculiar because you can see just how much the coastline or the shoreline has changed on Bald Head Island 150 some years after the Civil War. Battery Holmes, the largest of the batteries, is now underwater. It's beneath that river channel out in the ocean. The shoreline has changed that dramatically. But fortunately, battery number 4 is the most intact battery. You'll notice, as we discussed this morning, there were 4 cannons at battery number 4. 2 of the 4 were old 24-pounders, meaning that these cannons fired a 24-pound cannonball, and the other 2 were called 32-pounders. The same kind of concept here. They are firing 32-pound cannonballs. And you'll notice that each of the 4 cannons were placed on this battery in a crescent shape. You can think of a crescent as a C. This is an inverted C, or half of a circle. The idea was that these cannons could provide enfilading fire. It's a big term, enfilading. The idea was if there were troops attacking this wall of Fort Holmes, those cannons could fire a cannonball down the length of a line of troops. If you fire a cannonball perpendicular to a line of troops, you're going to hit 1, 2, 3 soldiers. But if you can fire parallel down the length of a bunch of soldiers all lined up, you can knock down arguably the entire line of those troops. So this battery stuck out beyond the fort's wall in that crescent shape in order to provide this enfilading fire against any Union or Northern troops that would be attacking from the eastern part of this island. And that was the whole concept. You might wonder, why are so many cannons facing east, facing across the island, rather than out along the river where the Union warships would be trying to enter? Well, the Confederates were worried about Union soldiers landing on the eastern part of the island, out towards the Cape or the modern Shoals Club. If the Union troops could land out here on the eastern part of the island and work their way towards Old Baldy Lighthouse, towards the river, they could place cannon on this island that would be in range of Fort Caswell over on Oak Island, where that current lighthouse is stationed. They could be within range of Southport, known during the Civil War as Smithville, and that could cause a significant problem for Confederates. Additionally, if Union troops could land on the eastern part of this island, get cannon on the island, they could now shell these blockade runners trying to get into the Cape Fear River and blockade runners trying to leave the Cape Fear River, laden with cotton that's going to be traded for war materials in Europe, or if they're entering the river, laden with all these war materials such as ammunition and cannon and rifles and medicine. So the idea was all these cannons facing eastward, facing towards Cape Fear from Old Baldy Lighthouse, is going to prevent any Union troops from using this island as a base. We do not want the Union or Federals to create a fort of their own on Bald Head Island and have their cannon within range of all these other fortifications. Now, at Battery number 3 last week, we did bring up all these sister forts, we call it. The idea is that in 1863, when the Confederates construct Fort Holmes on Bald Head Island, it's not acting in a vacuum. It's not acting by itself. It's going to need help from other forts in this area. We had Fort Caswell on Oak Island, where the lighthouse is today. There was Fort Johnston, renamed as Fort Pender in what is downtown Southport. On this map, it's labeled as Quarantine Fort. Today, it's known as Fort Anderson. It's a state historic site roughly 13 miles north of Southport on the opposite side of the Cape Fear River, and arguably the largest of the forts constructed by the Confederates in the lower Cape Fear, which is Fort Fisher. And that additionally is a state historic site roughly 15 miles north from Bald Head Island in what is today Curie Beach. So we're going to head up the trail here and take a look at what remains of battery number 4. Again, this battery is probably the most intact of all the Confederate earthworks here on Bald Head Island. And if you're listening out there, give us a shout out in the comments. I'm going to be following along here on my phone. Let us know where you're listening from, what your connection is to Bald Head Island. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear them. We'll get you an answer. I know Mackie had a question this morning. One of those 24-pounders, what was the range of those guns? Remember, there are two 24-pounders here in this battery. Well, we answered Mackie in the comments, and let me just reiterate, they had a range of about a mile. So these 24-pounders here at Fort Holmes could easily reach halfway across Bald Head Island. If you're familiar with this island, these cannons could go from this location here at Bald Head Island and fire a cannonball that would reach the maritime market halfway across the island. So these are no small pieces of artillery. These are large, massive pieces of ordnance that have a tremendous amount of firepower. I don't know about you, but I would not want to be hit by a 24-pound solid piece of iron. So I'm going to take a look here and see if we have any comments. We have quite a few listeners. Again, give us a shout out. It's always fun, or it's more fun for us and for you when you all interact with us here on Bald Head Island. So when you come down here, this wayside marker has a really great depiction of what this fort would have looked like. Remember, this fort's walls, they were built out of sand and earth rather than brick or mortar or stone or wood. Because when a cannonball hits a wall made out of sand and earth, the sand and earth acts like a sponge. It just absorbs the shock of the cannonball and maintains the wall's integrity. So it was pretty ingenious technology. And this technology, this earthen works, it was used by both North and by South during the American Civil War. It was also used in wars previous to the Civil War. It wasn't like somebody woke up during the American Civil War and decided, you know what we're going to do? Build a wall out of earth and sand. This technology, this idea had been around previous to the American Civil War. This conflict is one of the first conflicts in American history and in world history where earthworks are used by a majority of armies during the war in places and locales all across the theater of war. So this is one of the first conflicts where it's universal, where armies on each side are using this technology to their benefit. And one of the only depictions we have of Fort Holmes is located in our archives. There are other copies of this. It comes from a Harper's Weekly illustration published in December of 1864. This is a close-up, but you can see Fort Holmes here. You can see these massive mounds of earth and sand. And as I always joke, you can tell that it was a Yankee that drew this illustration because I don't know about you, but Old Baldy definitely does not look like that. They did their best, though, to create what Old Baldy would have looked like. So again, the only depiction that we know of Fort Holmes during the American Civil War. Hi, Donna, watching from Long Island. You are making our home quarantine interesting. Thank you. Well, hey, we're doing what we can to keep it interesting for you and to keep it interesting for us. You folks know out there, if I go longer than a week without talking about the Civil War, it's very likely that I'm going to go insane. So you're keeping me sane, and we're trying to keep you sane as well. Provide a little bit of entertainment and education.
Mackie's afraid you're going to fall off the boardwalk.
No, Mackie, you know I know this boardwalk like the back of my hand, but I promise I won't fall off. That would not be good. I'm thinking if I fall off, there are not going to be any more videos done this week. So we have the fort's walls out here, and you can see the elevation. It's almost like I paid these folks. They walked up on top of the wall there. You can just see now how high up they are compared to Chris and I down below here. That is the elevation of this crescent. The crescent begins where they are, and it wraps around to the right of your screen, to the right of my right-hand shoulder, and back around here to our left. This massive crescent shape that would have had 4 pieces of artillery, 2 24-pounders and 2 32-pounders. Now this massive mound of earth right here behind me, that actually is within the fort's wall. The fort's wall is out that way on the boardwalk. So this isn't one of those mounds that created the wall of Fort Holmes. In fact, this is the remains of a magazine. And a magazine is just a fancy word for a cave that was built by man. It's a man-made cave. And the purpose of these man-made caves or magazines are to safely store all your ammunition, all your gunpowder, and all your cannonballs that are supplying the 32-pounders and 24-pounders. You think you don't want to store all your gunpowder, all your cannonballs out in the open on a big old pile within your wall of your fort, because what if a Union or Federal cannonball comes crashing in and just so happens to land right where you've stored all that gunpowder? That's going to be a pretty big explosion, and it's not going to be pretty not only for your fort's walls, but for the soldiers manning that fort. So in fact, we're actually going to create these magazines, those man-made caves. They're going to be created by walls that are created out of the live oak and the palmetto wood that's abundant here on Bald Head Island. We're going to create a framework using that wood, and then we're going to pile sand and reinforced soil on top of that wooden framework, mounded up into a massive scale like you see today. And that's going to create some insulation, some buffer. So when an errant Federal cannonball finds its way into the fort, it's going to hit that sand that's covering all your ammunition, and it's just like the fort's wall, going to absorb the shock. and keep all your gunpowder safe underneath there. So it's interesting enough, this magazine has never been excavated. It's never been thoroughly excavated, so I always gotta wonder how many cannonballs like the ones I showed you this morning based in our archives, how many of those cannonballs are still underneath there? How much gunpowder is still underneath that magazine just waiting to be found by an archaeologist? We may never know, but maybe someday we'll get somebody in there to uncover all these treasures that will help illuminate and tell the story of Fort Holmes. Berries, you are just down the road from our daughter's house. Hey, Berries, are you in America or are you back in England? That's what I want to know. It's been a while since I've seen y'all, so I hope you're well and I hope you're healthy. We miss you here on Bald Head Island.
She said she's watching from Holly Springs.
Oh, get out of here. Okay. Oh, I see it up there, watching from Holly Springs. That's great. Well, like I said, I hope y'all are safe and well, and we really hope to see you soon. So we're going to come up out onto the fourth wall here and really kind of from the top get you a sense of the elevation here. And while we're walking, I'm going to share with you, this is a great book. We unfortunately don't sell it in our gift shop because it's out of publication, but it's called Bright and Gloomy Days. It's the Civil War correspondence of Captain Charles Frederick Banson. Captain Banson served in the Army in Northern Virginia. That's, if you're familiar with the Civil War, General Lee's army. Fighting most of these famous battles like Gettysburg and Antietam or Sharpsburg if you're a Southerner. But eventually, Captain Banson serves here on Bald Head Island. And he was a prolific letter writer. He wrote back to Dad and Mom frequently. So much of what we know about Fort Holmes and the soldiers' experiences here on Bald Head Island during the Civil War come from the letters of Captain Banson. And I just want to give you a little sketch of what his perspective was about this fort. We are on a point southwest of the Cape, nearest Smithville, we know as Southport today. Bald Head Lighthouse is at our camp. Its height is nearly 100 feet, a very complete affair. It was built in 1819 and is strong today as when it was first erected, being composed entirely of stone, brick, iron, and glass. The lantern is said to cost $10,000 before the war. It is a really curiosity, and not only curious, but a fine specimen of ingenuity and skillful workmanship. It was made in Paris. Well, a few things he got wrong. Old Baldy is taller than 100 feet. She was built in 1817, not 1819. And very curiously, we always thought that Old Baldy's lantern was disassembled and taken to Wilmington. But very clearly here, he's telling us that the lantern was still here in 1864, and Captain Banson saw it himself. Now, he could be lying in his letter to impress his father, but it's a very good indication that Old Baldy's light, or its lantern, its Fresnel lens, was still here on Bald Head Island 3 years after the war begins. I am not sufficiently well versed in engineer matters, but to attempt to give you an idea of our works, if I were, it would hardly be right, for some evil might occur if such a description were to fall into the enemy's hands. The men have very good log huts, roofs, floors, bunks, fireplaces, doors, and everything in better style than I have ever seen in this army. And yet I have no quarters, but as soon as some lumber comes, I will put up a house. I have made a rough sketch of our house. It will be double with a passage between the rooms, likewise under the same roof. Very nice shingles are made on the island, and we have some good carpenters detailed. A very good job can be put up, I assure you. He continues to talk about they have beds, we live in very good style. We have chinaware and silver spoons. The garrison on this island consists of 8 companies from the 40th North Carolina Regiment of Infantry and Captain William Badham's Light Battery. That battery is the Edenton Bell Battery we discussed on this morning's broadcast. The regiment is sometimes called artillery, but they drill in infantry as well as artillery exercise. And the companies are not crowded together, but are scattered inside the works, with generally 2 companies at a place. The works extend in very nearly one continuous line, about 1.5 miles in length. The companies are very full, all averaging of more than 100 men each. It's about 1,100 soldiers that served here in Fort Holmes during the Civil War. The discipline here is much more strict than in the Virginia armies. No one can pass outside the lines at night without a countersign, a code word, if you will. What's the password? We're not going to let you in the fort unless you know the password. It's basically what he's talking about here. But this is my favorite quote. It gives you an idea of the tone or what it must have looked like here. The school children on field trips love this quote. Says that the water here is not very good, but it could be worse. Palmetto abounds in the greatest profusion and gives the place a very tropical appearance. The bud is dried, bleached, and manufactured into hats. Many of the men are great experts, and their wives, of whom there are a number here, as well as children, are not behind them in skill. It really does not look like a camp to see the mechanics at work, the men washing, the children playing around, mixed up in a motley crowd of dogs and cats and hogs and chickens, old and young, great and small. We have tailors and shoemakers, brick masons and carpenters. Well, in fact, there are representatives from every mechanical and mercantile pursuit. Even one of the privates in Company C is a proprietor of the City Hotel in Wilmington. So I think he hit it best. Looks like a motley crew here. I don't think that they're doing a very good job at social distancing, if you will, here in this camp. Can you imagine? They brought their wives. They brought their children to camp. They brought their pets. It would have looked like a small farm here with all the hogs and the cattle and the chickens to provide substance. This is not your normal Civil War camp that you are probably imagining from your school days or learning, perhaps if you're a school child listening. This is a camp that came here once the men arrived in Bald Head Island. They weren't stationed elsewhere, so they made very much a permanent home on Bald Head Island for the duration of the Civil War. I'm gonna check in here and see what's going on. Living over here permanently. Okay, perfect. Anybody else? Just give us a holler on those comments, especially if you had any questions. I love this little wayside marker. We're going to end here today. It shows you what the size of these cannons are talking about. And I brought up a word this morning, a barbette. This is a barbette. It's the infrastructure that is created to support those cannons, whether it be a 32-pounder or a 24-pounder here at Battery number 4. Meaning that once these cannons got here, you weren't moving them. They were there to stay. And in fact, they were so heavy and so difficult to move, rather than taking away these cannons when they abandoned Fort Holmes in January of 1865, the Confederates leave the cannon here to be captured by the Federal troops. And as we discussed this morning, that's how we know what type of artillery were here. When the Union captured Fort Holmes, I believe it's January 17th, 1865, they almost immediately come up with a list, a laundry list of, hey, we found this type of artillery and that type of artillery. So it gives us an idea of what was left behind here, that primary resource or primary source. And we're looking across the saltwater marsh. You can see way up there in the distance, you're not going to be able to see it on the camera, but about 15 miles in that direction is Fort Fisher. And that's what happens. Rather than attacking Bald Head Island, when the Union Navy and Army come to capture Wilmington in December of 1864, they attack Fort Fisher across that marsh to our north. Well, in fact, Fort Fisher is so well defended, and the Navy and the Army of the Federal forces botch that invasion so terribly, the first battle of Fort Fisher ends up being a Confederate victory. Well, a few weeks later, the Union Army and Union Navy come back to Wilmington. During that second battle of Fort Fisher, the Union succeeds in capturing that fort. And if we look here on the map, once Fort Fisher falls to Bald Head Island's north, it now renders Fort Holmes on Bald Head Island and Fort Caswell on Oak Island and Fort Pender or Johnston on Smithville, now known as Southport. All these forts now are behind enemy lines. So the Confederates evacuate these forts, and they fight a battle at Fort Anderson a few weeks later. That battle does not go well for the Confederates, and it is none other than George Washington's birthday in late February 1865. The Confederates evacuate Wilmington, and the Union or Federal forces capture the city. It's only 94 days after the Union or Federal troops capture Wilmington that General Robert E. Lee surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. That is how important the Port of Wilmington was to maintaining or supplying General Lee's armies up in Virginia. Without the Port of Wilmington to bring in those European war materials, General Lee is forced to surrender. Susan, this is fascinating. Listen again from Annapolis, Maryland. Hey, Susan, we're really great you're listening again. I hope everything is well with your family and that you're listening from a healthy household. Any other comments here? Let me see. It's always Cheryl Atkinson from Mullins, South Carolina. Got to catch part of today's tour on my lunch break in Florence, South Carolina. Had planned to visit this past weekend. Love BHI since my first visit in 1987. Enjoying watching the tours after work. Well, Cheryl, thank you for listening. We appreciate your support. I hope everybody's happy and healthy in your household, getting through all this. And we can't wait to see you on Bald Head Island once this pandemic is over. First visit 1987. I'm thinking Bald Head Island looked a little different in 1987 than it did during your last visit. Mackie Miller, were all the families that were living on Bald Head killed, or did the federal forces spare them? Yeah, well, there were very few casualties here on Bald Head Island as the result of action or warfare. In fact, and we're going to delve into this in a later episode, most of the deaths here on Bald Head Island were due to disease rather than battle actions. The families and the soldiers here, they were evacuated without harm. They evacuated quickly, but they were not under the threat or under barrage of cannon fire, rifle fire as they evacuated. So I would argue that all, if not an overwhelming majority of those families were safely evacuated without harm and found refuge up in Wilmington or even further into the interior of North Carolina at later battles such as Bentonville as the Confederate armies are retreating towards Raleigh, and they will eventually surrender outside of Durham in a place called Bennett Place. It's another state historic site in very late April 1865. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up, see, our army here in North Carolina surrendered after Robert E. Lee surrendered up in Virginia. There was about 2, if not, I think 3 weeks after Robert E. Lee surrendered that we still had an active campaign or an active Confederate army here in North Carolina. So one last pan you can kind of see.
Did you see that Doreen Fairbank?
Hey, Doreen. No, I didn't.
This is very interesting. Thanks. Doreen's on our board.
Yeah. Hey, Doreen. I hope everybody's well and healthy in your household. Hey, there I see it now. Doreen had a little bit of delay on this. Pardon me. Doreen, hey, it's good to hear from you. We really appreciate your kind words and your enthusiasm for trying to make, as Chris was saying, lemonade out of lemons when life hands us this pandemic.
If anybody else is out there, we have several viewers. Let us know where you're listening from, what you're doing, and tell us that you're healthy. We want to hear everybody's healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll let us know we're all healthy here on Bald Head Island, and our staff working remotely. Everybody's making the best of it as they can. So just one last pan before I make some announcements. You can see the elevation. So here we are at the top of the ramparts, at the top of the wall when we were looking at that magazine or man-made cave, we were way down there below. And that's why I mean that battery number 4 has the most intact of the fort's walls. We still have that elevation here at battery number 4, thanks to the preservation efforts of the Bald Head Island Association and the very, very meticulous and closeful watching of the Old Baldy Foundation to make sure that these cultural remains are protected so we can continue to interpret these remains in public programmings such as this. So just a few announcements. Hey, on April 8th, we're going to have one of our historic happy hours. Of course, we can't meet at Old Baldy Lighthouse, but we're going to be bringing you that historic happy hour virtually through something very similar to this, except that you're going to be on camera showing us what kind of cocktail that you've brought to the party. So you can find information on how to sign up for that historic happy hour by visiting our website, oldbaldy.org. If you sign up for our monthly newsletter, there is a code in that newsletter so you can sign up for this program virtually free. You see what we're doing there? Or if you want to pay that $15, which is our normal fee for historic happy hours, we very much would appreciate that donation to help support our efforts to preserve and interpret the history on Bald Head Island. Now, speaking of our website, Abby Sachs, who is our special events.
Abby Overton.
Abby Overton. See, Abby just recently got married, and I'm the fool that keeps calling her by her maiden name. So I am sorry, Abby and Justin. Abby Overton was working really hard over the winter and during this self-isolation to bring us a brand new website. Folks, go check out this website. It went live just an hour or two ago. It looks incredible. It's engaging, it's beautiful, it's chock full of information. And so check it out. We appreciate your patience. It's taken a little bit of time to work through some kinks in the process. You don't want me working through the kinks, so we're very glad we have Abby and Chris to do that for us. So we appreciate your patience, but go over to oldbaldy.org when you're looking up about that historic happy hour and check out that beautiful new website. Now, if you couldn't join us for this program live, or you're looking for a past program that I keep referring to, you can find those on our Facebook page. You can find them on Instagram TV, or you can also find it on our YouTube page. And when you visit our YouTube page, hit subscribe for us. Subscribe to our YouTube page just as you're following our Facebook, and we'd really appreciate your support as we continually grow our social media presence. So let me take one last look here. Any more comments?
No.
I don't think so.
Karen Klein's watching. Karen Klein Mortimer.
Oh, hey, Karen. We show up everywhere. So, hey, folks, thanks for listening. I hope you and your family are safe, that you're healthy. Continue to do what you can to break this pandemic so we can all get back to things as normal. We'll see you at a future episode. Have a great evening, everybody.